Good morning, everyone. Welcome this morning. Thanks for joining me for this webinar. The webinar today is entitled Working the Crowd. The subject of that is how to maximise your exhibition ROI through effective on-stand techniques. So this is a follow-up to the first webinar I did approximately a month ago entitled Maximise Your ROI. So it's a sort of natural follow-on. That webinar focused on the pre-show marketing phase of your campaign. I hope you found that webinar and the accompanying ebook useful. If you haven't yet had a chance to view that webinar or download the ebook, then please go to the address that you'll see on the screen, sustainabilitylive.com, max your ROI. We're going to be putting lots of useful resources there. So that first webinar, the ebook is there for download, and also once this webinar has finished, we'll be recording it and putting that there too. So if you have to rush off halfway through, or you've got other members of your team that you think those resources will be useful to, any outside agencies that you're using, then please forward them that link, sustainabilitylive.com, max your ROI. Those resources are all there to help you get the very best from the event. So just before we get started, some quick housekeeping. I'm delighted to say today you don't have to listen to me all the way through. We've got a really good guest speaker, Simon Naudi. More about Simon in a moment. We'll be hosting this webinar today for about 45 minutes. So Simon's going to be speaking for about 35-40 minutes. And then afterwards, he'll be able to take any questions you have. I'm assisted today by another member of my event marketing team, Stacey Bird. Stacey will be answering any questions during the webinar that you wish to post using the Q&A functionality that you'll see in front of you. She'll also be collating some of the questions for Simon to answer, so please feel free to utilise that question and answer functionality, and then Stacey will give those questions to me and we'll cover those with Simon at the end. To save you making many notes, we're recording this webinar, as I said, and it will be available later this week. So a quick introduction to our guest speaker today, Simon Naudi. Simon is the CEO of Answers Training International. He is an honours graduate in psychology and set up his training consultancy, Answers Training, 27 years ago after a career in financial services and advertising. He's worked in the events industry for over 25 years, so he's really, really experienced. He's sold stands, he's organised his own conferences, and I first came across Simon earlier in my career running exhibitor workshops, and I believe he is one of the best in the business at that. And he's also exhibited at numerous shows, so he's kind of seen it from the exhibitor perspective, the organizer perspective, you know, and running his consultancy for 27 years. He's very experienced in how to give you practical tips to take away and apply. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Simon.
Thank you very much indeed, David. With a build-up like that, I now feel very privileged, but also very old. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming today. The idea behind my session is really to look at the key things that make a difference to you when you're exhibiting. You know, the one thing that always strikes me is you can go to any show, doesn't matter whether it's trade or consumer, and you can see two stands separated by no more than 2 meters of carpet, both doing roughly the same sort of thing. And yet one stand is very busy and one stand is very quiet. And the interesting thing is they've both paid an identical amount of money to be there. So my focus is going to be very much upon what's it going to take to be sure that yours is the stand that has all the activity and actually goes back and says, yes, that was really good, as opposed to, that was a bit quiet, wasn't it? So I'm going to look at some of the mechanics, and what I've done is I've almost tried to assemble my frequently asked questions. You know, whenever I run these sessions, generically I'm asked the same sort of things. You know, does this work? Should we do that? Is this a good idea? And hopefully I'll address most of those issues before the session is over. Clearly, if there's something I've missed or there's any specific questions you've got, then I'm happy to take questions as we come to the end of the session. So without further ado, really, I just want to go on and start thinking about the visitor's perception. And really, the whole point with the visitor is it's their first impression. You know, when they first look at you or they first look at your stand, they form an overall impression. And we've all heard the adage and lay language that you should never judge a book by the cover, but clearly people do. And the idea being is that if you don't know how to behave on your stand, people are not going to look at you and go, well, underneath all this bizarre behaviour, I'm sure there are some really nice people working for a really nice company selling some really nice products and services. I suspect they'll give you a wide berth and walk past you. So the key to this is to think about first impressions and what you guys are doing to convey that. Now, in terms of time, you haven't really got that long. They say on average you have between 10 and 12 seconds to influence that first impression. And really, the reason we've come up with the figure of 10 to 12 seconds is 10 to 12 seconds is about the average length of time it takes the average visitor to walk past the average stand. So unless your stand is very thin and long, that's really what we're talking about in terms of the time that you've got available to you. Now, in that time, as they walk past your stand, they'll have a look at you, they'll have a look at your colour scheme, they'll have a look at the people on your stand, and they'll certainly look at the graphics and the messaging that's on your panels. So again, just a very quick mention of the word graphics. When I go to shows, I see a number of words that people typically bandy around, and the problem is that some of these words have meanings that people perhaps at first impression don't realise. The classic example, I suppose, is a word like cheap. You know, they'll do a cheap offer for the show, whatever else. Well, folks, again, if I ask you the question, if something is cheap, what goes through your mind? Well, it's cheap and nasty, low quality, don't really want it, thank you very much. And the idea behind it is if you go and buy something that you really shouldn't have bought and you come back, you don't boast that you bought a cheap suit or a cheap pair of shoes. You'll say it was cost effective or it was a bargain or you saved a fortune. So again, it's thinking about the meaning behind the messaging. There's clearly a word that marketing departments all over the world use that sort of pervades our shows, and that is cheap. And as well as cheap offers, it's free things. So for example, they'll do free advice, they'll do free consultancy or free whatever it happens to be. Again, ladies and gentlemen, if I say to you, think about it, something is free. What's the first thing that goes through your mind? Well, free, there's a catch. What's the catch? No such thing as a free lunch. All these things go through your mind. And actually, even if it were free and there were no catch, then you think, well, I don't really want it, thank you very much. You know, if it's that good, how can they afford to give away? What sort of advice are you going to get if it's free advice? So again, think very much and carefully about the messaging that you give. You know, you can say these things more effectively. So when you go to a hotel or you're traveling on an airline, they don't say, Mr. Naudi, come in, have a free upgrade to first class. You know, you get all those things, but they don't call them free. It's not a free sweet that you get or a free breakfast. They call it complimentary, because complimentary means the same as free without any of those negative connotations. So it's not my intention to go through a whole sort of lexicography of words that you can or can't use, but again, look at your messaging, think about it from the visitor's point of view. As they walk past your stand, what is the message that they're getting? Now, we know a thing or three about visitors, and they have a sort of set of expectations that they come to shows armed with. So, for example, we know that when they come to a show, one of the things that they like is they like the fact that there's a little bit of choice. And that is good news, which is why, you know, they like to see as many competitors as possible under one roof. On the downside, they expect it to be a little bit confusing, and that's almost an occupational hazard. But the most important thing is that they want to be there, and that's the thing that you guys need to sort of really focus on. You know, those visitors have not been bribed or coerced or blackmailed into turning up. They're there primarily because they want to be there. So once they're there, we need to think about what we're going to do with them and how we can maximise our own return on that investment. Now, in terms of objectives, it's quite clear, really. There's sort of three parts to this. The first part is you need to actually think about your own objectives in terms of what you hope to try and achieve by being at the show. And we'll talk very, very briefly on those. The second aspect of this, I suppose, is to consider what your visitors expect to get from coming to the show. Because clearly, if your objectives and theirs are at odds, then there's going to be a mismatch somewhere. And in a way, those first two should determine your role. Now, I'd like to try and give you an example, if I can, of what I mean by that. So let's imagine, for the sake of argument, ladies and gentlemen, that you decide this time round at the show, your prime objective is to be there to do a major data capture exercise. So you think, right, we want to capture as many names, addresses, emails, whatever, as possible within the time that we've got. So you start to think long and hard, and you think, well, what are we going to do to get visitors onto our stand? And you think, I know, everybody loves a freebie, let's give them free booze. That'll get people on our stand. Well, the problem with free booze, of course, is you've got all the corporate social responsibility that says, well, we don't want people to drink driving and all that stuff. So you decide in your wisdom that the way to do it is to go down the route of giving them a free cup of coffee and maybe a complimentary cup of coffee. And you decide to organise your stand so you've got a big barista area at the end and you can make them a really decent cup of coffee. So that's your plan, and actually at the moment the doors open, you think, wow, success, ka-ching. We have got a queue of people queuing to get onto our stand. You think, well, how fantastic is that? Objective achieved. Well, let's just have a look at what happens in terms of time. Let's imagine a visitor is in your queue for 5 minutes, and by the time they get to the front of the queue, it takes 5 minutes to make a decent cup of coffee. And when they get the coffee, it's clearly too hot to drink, so it's going to take 4 or 5 minutes for that to cool down enough for them to drink it. And then it's going to take 4 or 5 minutes for them to drink it. And then they're not just going to bugger off and think, well, that was great, thanks very much, thanks for the free coffee. So they pretend that they're interested for another 4 or 5 minutes. And suddenly you've got a situation where one visitor has taken up 20 to 25 minutes of your time. Now remember, if your original objective was to see as many people as possible in a short period of time, then clearly corporate hospitality is not the way to go. I hope that makes sense. Now, in terms of objectives, one of the things that I tend to do, because I'm quite sad and I haven't got a life, I tend to visit a large number of events, and I don't really mind whether they are trade shows or consumer shows. I'll just go because I'm quite interested in why people exhibit, and I'll grab people at random off their stand and ask them a simple question, why are you here? Well, ladies and gentlemen, what follows next in true Miss World fashion in reverse order are my 4 most frequent responses to that question. So in 4th position, I get the reply, because it's my turn. I think, that's great, thanks very much. 3rd place, because someone was sick and they wheeled me out at the last minute. I'm doing them a big favour, aren't I, Marta? In 2nd place, we get, I'm here to get networked completely with my clients. And in top position, worryingly, I don't know. Oh, because someone in marketing booked it. Oh, because our competitors are here, that's why we're here. And I think, okay, well, maybe my question is a bit ambiguous, and I should ask a more specific question, which is, primarily, what is your objective in exhibiting? And again, sadly, folks, these are my 2 top frequent answers. In 2nd place, I want to just survive. I want to get through the next 3 days. And it's almost like they see it as an inconvenience. And they miss the point that during those 3 days of the show, they can do more business than they could at any other time. But scarily, the most common answer I get is it's to give away brochures. And what they'll do is they go, oh, it was a great show. We ran out of business cards in 25 minutes. It was fantastic. We ran out of brochures by the first afternoon. Well, I guess in the absence of any other metric, yes, it's fine. What I'd encourage you to do, though, is to think seriously about why you're there. If you ask people what are your objectives for exhibiting, the sort of things that people come up with are to launch new products or new services, or to show a new range, or test the market. It could be just to a big branding or promoting the image type thing, checking out the competition, and then in some cases meeting specific buyers, new clients, existing clients, overseas clients, whatever. Well, if you want a very good tip, my advice is rather than just going for blank objectives, go for what I would call real objectives. And I've put in some just arbitrary numbers here, but for example, try and achieve 3 direct sales on the day, or make 25 appointments, or whatever the figure happens to be. So at least that way you've got a metric that tells you, yes, this was successful, and yes, we need to be there again next year, and we need a bigger stand or a larger stand, whatever it happens to be. So I'm not going to bang on too much about objectives. I know David's covered that off in his previous seminar. So just in summary, the most important thing is agree the objectives in terms of why you as a company want to be there. Secondly, try and make sure that they're in line with your corporate objectives. And probably the most important is make sure that everybody else on the stand understands why you're there. And that seems to be the key. In that way, you don't have people rushing off, schmoozing your existing clients if your objective is to try and get some new business. Now, in terms of those visitors, if there was such a thing as robo-visitor, that would be a wonderful thing. Anybody who's wearing pink is a target, great, let's grab them onto our stand. The sad reality is that it's not that clear to identify. So we have to rely upon our own experience. Now, we know certain things about them, we know what they like, we know what they dislike, and we know that they come to most events armed with a set of expectations that they hope to see by attending the show. Now, in terms of that information, folks, what we do know is there's been a lot of research done in terms of visitor feedback, and we ask visitors constantly, why do you come to a show, what do you like about shows, what do you like about exhibitors, what do you hate about exhibitors, and so on and so forth. And you can build a very strong picture. And actually the most impressive thing is it doesn't matter whether it's a trade show or a consumer show, the reasons people buy seem to be the same. And in terms of that feedback, the most important things to bear in mind, I guess, is that the main reason that people visit an exhibition is to find out what's new or what's the latest. There seems to be a sort of quest for cutting-edge innovation. The second main reason that people tell you that they come is because they've got a problem and they're looking for solutions to those problems. Now, those may be conscious and at the front of their minds, or a bit of subconscious, and actually it occurs in the course of a conversation with you. In terms of things that they hate the most about visiting shows and visiting stands, their number one wind-up, ladies and gentlemen, is they hate being sold to. Pushy salespeople is top of the bill every single time. And the number two thing is they ask a question and they go, oh, I don't know. Or the person that can answer that question is on lunch. Can I come back later? And of course they don't come back later. They go to somebody else and get the answer there. So clearly, you know, the message here is make sure that you've got somebody on your stand who understands all the things that you're likely to be asked about. And if not, make sure you've got them on the end of a mobile phone so at least you can ask them a question and give your visitor that answer straight away. The key to all of this, obviously, is to try and influence those visitors to come onto your stand and identify the ones that have the most potential for you. Now, clearly, you know, with all the visitors that walk through the door, I doubt very much that there's anybody listening today who will want every single visitor. So it's about identifying from that visitor profile or that visitor audience who are the ones that you wish to do business with. Now, clearly, with good exhibiting, there's a series of do's and don'ts. And I can tell you from personal experience, when I visit a show, the more of these things that I do, the more successful my return happens to be, and the more of the don'ts I avoid, same story. So in terms of the mechanics about it, the sort of questions I get asked most frequently, people often say, you know, should we wear a uniform? And by uniform, I don't mean, you know, peak cap, gold braid, but I mean, you know, should we all look the same? And the answer is very, very much, yes, you should. And that's to the point that if you're deciding that you're all going to wear suits, then everybody should be in a suit. And ideally, if they're going to be black, they should be all black, not black with a fleck or black with a stripe. You should have a uniform look. And the reason for this, folks, is, think about it. If I see two of you dressed dissimilarly on your stand, I don't know whether you are two colleagues having a conversation or whether you are a stand holder having a conversation with another visitor. So if I interrupt you, the risk is, if I'm being rude, in other words, if it is a visitor, I'm going to look foolish. So rather than put myself in that position, I'll probably come back later. And in that time, of course, I see somebody else and it might be too late. So as long as I can see that you both work on the stand, I'll have no compunction in interrupting you at all. Next main question I get asked, I guess, is bear in mind that stands have a habit of being progressively trashed as the day goes on, and so therefore it's quite important to try and keep it looking as good and pristine as you can. You've got no control over what time your key visitor walks past your stand. If that happens to be 3 o'clock in the afternoon and it looks like you've been partying hard, then clearly it's not a good look. So again, good tip, if you've got the resources, appoint someone as a stand manager, and their sole job should be to make sure that some of these things take place. Your stand should also be functional. And the idea is that no matter how pretty your hanging basket looks, if the visitor clunks their head on it every time they walk onto your stand, it's not a good look. Move it. So don't be scared to move things if they're not working for you. And the other big area I get asked is, you know, gimmicks. Should we have a gimmick, and if so, do they work? Now, the most common gimmick, I guess, is a cardboard box with a slot in it, and the idea is a message saying, you know, put in your card and win an iPad or salmon or champagne or whatever. And the question I get asked is, do these things work? Well, clearly they work brilliantly at getting names and addresses of people who like to win an iPad or eat champagne or drink champagne or eat salmon. Whether they're very good at getting people that are prospects for you is a very different question. So again, if you're going to have a gimmick, try and link the prize in such a way that it will only appeal to the sort of people that you're trying to attract. I did some work recently with a boat show, and one enterprising chap there offered a free boat cleaning service. Now, he didn't get a lot of business cards, but everybody that put a card in clearly had a boat that wanted to be cleaned. And the weirdos, obviously, have posted some extra cards extraneously. Brochures, you know, come the revolution, I will ban them, but if you do have to have brochures, think about how you're going to vend them. Don't stand there going, would you like a brochure, would you like a brochure? All you have to do is to walk outside any exhibition venue and see how many brochures have been thrown away. Think about, are you going to have them in a pile, are you going to have them fanned out, which is a bit anal, I wouldn't do it. Should you have them just on the table so people can access them? Yes, I would. Or you can have freestanding literature racks or wall-mounted ones, and again, they work quite well. In terms of do's, folks, the most common do's, I guess, are do make sure that you give yourself lots of shifts and breaks. The natural temptation is you get tired, and also you'll want lunch at lunchtime, and again, that's the time when most visitors could walk past your stand, so make sure you've got a rota system organised so there's always somebody on your stand at all times. Do try and be natural. By this I mean two things. One, don't go and buy a brand new pair of shoes because they will kill your feet. But also, don't have somebody on your stand who doesn't normally wear a suit wearing a suit. Because no matter how many Hugo Boss Armani labels you give them, they will still look like somebody who doesn't normally wear a suit wearing a suit. Do look busy. That's a really good tip. There's two types of busy, good busy and bad busy. Good busy is the sort of busy where it's fine to be interrupted, so clearing away the coffee cups, newspapers, umbrellas, briefcases, restocking the brochure pile, that's all really good busy. Bad busy is having conversations, looking engaged, or in any way conveying the image that you might be a bit hacked off if someone interrupts you. And finally, also think up some questions to ask. And although this sounds Janet and John, if you don't think of questions, folks, the most common question people will ask is, can I help you? To which there's really only two answers, and one of them is more polite than the other. The sort of questions I'm thinking of clearly are the sort of questions that give you a lot more information. So questions like, how familiar are you with our products and services? When do you plan to use our services? Because again, one question like this will give you a lot of information. It will tell you where they are in the buying cycle, maybe what other competitors they've considered, and they therefore almost self-qualify how good they are. But again, remember, these are not what I would call first-line questions. You need an icebreaker first. Hi, how's it going? What brings you to the show? And then you can follow up with one of your main questions. With any list of do's, clearly we also have a list of don'ts. And one of the most obvious don'ts is don't hover, glide, or pounce, or do the crab walk that you see people doing, where they sort of shuffle along their stand. The idea is we know what visitors like and don't like, and certainly being pounced upon or sort of approached in a glider-like fashion is not a good look. The other thing that people tend to try and do at a show is they hunt. And by hunting, what I mean is they establish eye contact with the visitor and they track them down every single aisle. And then strangely, when they approach your stand, they go right again and re-emerge behind you. Eye contact is a good thing, but make sure there's a smile accompanying it. Otherwise, it looks quite scary. Again, eat and drink and smoke, not that you can these days, but certainly I would avoid eating and drinking on your stand, only because there are two things. One, they give you a bad busy signal, I'm on my break, leave me alone, and people will. The second thing is eating and drinking typically creates mess, which again is not a good look. So if you do want to eat and drink on your stand, my advice is Cornish pasties on a competitive stand, because they fragment everywhere and make one hell of a mess. Again, folks, even if you've got chairs built into your stand, don't use them. If a client sits down, by all means sit down with them, but certainly don't sit down when it's quiet or when you're tired, because the message you will give is, I'm exhausted and I'd rather be sitting than talking to you, and surprise, surprise, people won't emerge and talk to you. There's also the point about, this is not an extensive list, but don't read papers, use mobile phones, laptops, whatever, because again, it gives the message that says, I'm busy, I'm preoccupied doing something else. Ditto, don't hold meetings with your colleagues. It's a very expensive meeting space. Save your meetings till after the event is over or the night before. And finally, should it not apply to you clearly, make sure that the people on your stand understand that the visitor doesn't really want to know what a great night you had, what flavour curry you had, and so on and so forth. Manning a stand with a hangover is the devil's own work, personal experience. Do also remember, folks, that the most important thing is the activity that takes place during the event probably only equates to a small percentage of the overall business that you will achieve by being there. We often get people saying, oh, hello, Simon, do you remember us? And I go, no, I'm sorry, I don't. And they go, no, we came on your stand this year. And they go, that's interesting, I wasn't there this year. I say, oh, well, it must have been last year. And so the point is, 18 months later, I'm still picking up leads that I've discounted. So it's worth bearing in mind that the activity focuses and spills either way of it. And one of the things to bear in mind in terms of this is clearly, once you've actually got those details of people, you've got a way of capturing them. You need to make sure you record them, whether it's on a bit of paper, whether it's with a laptop, but make sure you get their details. Nowadays there are scanners and light pens and all sorts of ways of getting their details. Don't assume that they'll still have a business card or indeed want to give you a business card. And also psychologically, less is more. So don't approach them with a clipboard and go, all right, can I just take down a few details? Because you can almost see their heart sinking, go, all right then. Pre-print a form, shrink it down to A5 if necessary, and therefore you can just tick the boxes that you want, write down any extra information that's important to make sure you've got a name, phone number, and an email address in case the phone number's wrong, and that's it. If I have to summarise, folks, what I would say at this stage is the most important thing, number one, is make sure you've understood, and everybody on your stand understands why you're there. So agree those objectives up front. They're really important. Secondly, do make use of all the PR and upfront preparation that's available. Most of this doesn't cost you anything. Less than 5% of exhibiting companies, I believe, use PR services, but clearly it's a very good, cost-effective way of generating attention and footfall onto your stand. The other thing is email your clients. Ask the people that you want to come to the show, that you want to meet, to come and visit you. Make appointments in advance. One of the things that we find is people say, oh, I don't want to invite my key clients because they'll meet my competitors. Well, you've got to make the assumption that if they are a key client, they're probably there because they want to see your competitors and they're going to come anyway. So it's much better that they turn up with an invitation from you rather than somebody else. And don't just leave it up to the organisers, is what I'm saying. There's an awful lot that you can do to target the exact sort of people that you want on your stand. and make appointments with them. You know, they don't have to keep them exactly, but you'll find that if you've got, let's say, 10 appointments fixed for the day, maybe 6 or 8 of those will turn up. They might not all turn up at the right time, but they will turn up, and that's, you know, 6 or 8 contacts that you wouldn't have had you not put in the pre-show work. The other thing is identify from the visitor database who it is exactly that you want to deal with, and what can you do with those people. And clearly, the more you understand about those people, the easier it becomes to encourage those people onto your stand and hopefully allow you to do business with them. Once they're on your stand, obviously engage, and you need to be very protective over the amount of time that you spend with them. As an example, you know, what is the best use of your time? If you've got a really hot prospect on your stand, should you spend a good half an hour, 40 minutes, or even an hour with a really hot prospect that's going to spend a lot of money? Or do you want to just spend 5 or 10 minutes getting their details and arranging a follow-up, and then that gives you time to go and see 4 or 5 others within the same time scale? So again, think about, you know, what will give you the best return. A lot of intensive time with less people, or less time with more people, and make appointments that you can then follow up afterwards. So once they're on your stand and you've got their details, make sure that information is captured somewhere. Don't leave it lying around on your stand. Don't send it to data entry and eventually entry send it to marketing, and eventually marketing get it round to the salespeople, because by then it's too late. So again, another good tip is that whilst, let's imagine you're at the show for all 3 days, it may be that your visitor's only there for the morning of the first day. Well, they're back in the office the next day, you're still at the stand. Why not that evening produce some sort of, you know, pro forma email template that just says, "Dear blogs, really good to see you on, you know, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. As promised, here is our brochure. Click a PDF attached. We look forward to speaking with you on, you know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, as promised." So the very next day, they go to their office, up pops your email with your logo, with your details, and your competitors are probably going to wait until they finish the show, then maybe have 1 or 2 days off to recover, and eventually follow up that lead. So first in, best dressed. Now, by first in, best dressed, one of the most important things is follow up. And for years, folks, I used to feel quite embarrassed saying that. Do make sure that you follow up your leads, because it sounded to me a bit Janet and John and a bit sort of, oh, it's obvious. Well, the most important thing to bear in mind here, folks, is an impressive statistic. The AEO, the Association of Event Organisers, did some research, and they asked exhibitors in the main a whole series of questions, one of which was, you know, do you follow up your leads effectively? Now, if I told you that the feedback came back of a number of visitors or a number of exhibitors who admitted to not following up their leads correctly was as high as 20%, that would be quite scary. But actually, if I told you it was as high as 30%, that would be quite terrifying. If I told you it was as high as 40%, you would think, no way, 40% of people don't follow up their leads. What if you knew that the figure of visitors, of exhibitors who admitted to not following up their leads was in excess of 50%? Or in excess of 60%. The really scary thing is that the latest research shows that 75% of exhibitors admit to not following up their leads correctly. 75% don't follow up their leads. What in heaven's name is the point of going and getting all these leads, spending all this money, and then doing nothing with them? Ladies and gentlemen, you know, we've just come out of the worst recession in memory, maybe in history. Do not let your leads just sit there. Do something with them. You know, remember, those people are wanting to spend money, and they'll want to spend it with you if you let them. You know, we've all had the experience of trying to phone a builder or a plumber or a roofer, and they just don't turn up. And you just think, are they that busy that they really don't want my business? So clearly with leads, very important, once you've got their information, make sure you follow up. You know, relevant information and information that they require, but don't be scared to follow up. Remember, these visitors want to be there, and they want to be in a position where they feel they are buying from you, so allow them to. Okay, that's really it from me. The most important thing is one last thing, which often is not in books, it's not in webinars, but it's one of the things that I believe makes a significant difference to your performance, and really, in a nutshell, that important thing is once you're on your stand, do look like you're having fun. Again, human nature, if I see 2 people, 2 stands, one that are looking very professional, very straight and very rigid and upright, and the other look like having a bit of fun. If they both provide a similar sort of service, I'm going to go to talk to the one that looks like they're having fun, because it looks like they want to be there, and it looks like they will be pleased to see me. And therefore, that is where I'm going to go and engage. So again, think hard about it. I appreciate this is down to your resources in terms of how big you are and how many staff you have, but think about how you're going to populate that, because clearly if the people on your stand look like they want to be there and they're pleased to see visitors, they will act like a magnet, and more visitors will come to see them. So that's it from me, folks. I guess now, if you do have any questions, it's a very good time to ask them. Ooh.
Thanks very much, Simon, for that. Very useful, interesting tips there, as always. So as Simon said, we'll now finish off with a sort of maybe a 5-10 minute Q&A session. So I've got a few that have come in to Stacey whilst Simon was talking, and there's the opportunity now for you to submit more. But let me just pose the first question, Simon, that I've got from Michael. How does one cope with time wasters or competitors on your stand?
Okay. Yes, I appreciate that sometimes that the problem isn't about how do you get people on your stand, it's actually how do you get them off your stand. One of the most important things to bear in mind, folks, is that you guys as a company have paid a lot of money to be there, to have an opportunity to sell to your visitors. The last thing you really want is people coming onto your stand trying to sell to you. Now, most people, I would say, are quite aware of this, and hopefully they'll come in and say, look, I need to talk to you, here's my business card, thanks very much, catch you after the show. But where people are a little bit more thick-skinned and don't get the message, then you can be a little bit blunter with your approach and say to them, and I often do, say, it's really nice to see you. Last thing I want to do is to take up your time, because I'm sure there's lots of other people you need to be talking to. Why don't we exchange business cards and we can catch up after the show? The other thing you can do is you can say, oh, haven't you met blogs? Oh, let me introduce you to them. And you just wheel them off your stand and introduce them to somebody else. You also need to brief your staff in terms of what your approach is going to be in terms of a strategy with dealing with competitors. So again, depending upon your industry, some people are quite open and friendly, and everybody expects that, and others it doesn't happen. So again, play that by ear, but clearly if you've got someone there who looks like they're after information, say, great, well, give me your details and I'll make sure I get that to you. The usual giveaways that their business cards are either, oh, I've just run out of business cards, and their badge mysteriously disappears. So again, capture the details and let them know that you'll approach them once the event is over, or give them the option that they can approach you once the show's over. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks very much, Simon. We've got a question here from Jake. Welcome back, Jake. I know you attended the first webinar. So Jake asks, when creating the pre-printed form that you mentioned to collect potential customer details, is there anything that you think should definitely be included on the form?
There is one thing that I would say is almost critical. Whether you get the name, address, phone number, whatever it happens to be, some of you might need to know budget, some of them need to know whereabout in the buying cycle they are. All those things are nice to have, and that's fine. The one thing that I would say is critical to have on that form is some sort of grading system, whether it's hot, cold, or boiling, or whether it's 1 to 10. But you need to establish how hot those leads are, because the person that takes the lead isn't necessarily, often isn't, the person that also then follows up on that lead. So a typical salesperson who's given, let's say, 10 leads will sift through them and go, nope, never heard of them, never heard of them. Oh, I'll call them next because they live really close to where I live, or oh, I'll call them next because they're a really big, sexy name. And then by the time you get through the 8th, 9th and 10th lead, maybe a week or two has passed, and actually they might have been ones that were really hot to trot, and somebody else has contacted them. So if you've got a way of identifying how keen they are to do some business and how soon they need to be contacted, make sure you've got a way of putting that onto that form. Now again, if it's a number system 1 to 10, as long as everybody understands the grading system, it'll work quite well. You may not wish to be doing that with a client next to you, but before you put the lead in the lead box, make sure you grade each lead so that you've got a priority system that you can follow up with afterwards. I hope that
okay,
answers
great
that.
stuff. Just to follow on from me on that question, Simon, I mean, these days, obviously, you can use hard copy printed forms. Our registration company has its own lead capture devices, and increasingly you can get apps for mobile devices where you can type information in. Is there a kind of favoured method that you would recommend?
I'm in favour of as automated as possible. I think that the problem with bits of paper and business cards is that they can get lost, whereas when it's electronic, you normally have a way of prioritising that. What I would say is if you're going to use a scanner or a light pen that people have, don't just grab the person's badge and scan it and then talk to them. It's a bit like asking for business cards. You don't just say, give me a business card. So what I would say is think about the etiquette, and once you've had that conversation, if it sounds like that there are prospects, say, look, it would be really useful if we could meet up. Would you mind very much if I just got your details? That way I can make sure that I follow up as you request. But certainly I would say, whether it's a mobile app, whether it's a a tablet, which are increasingly popular. Electronically, I think, is the way to go. Many of these systems allow you also to capture and download that information every night, which means that you can then send out a mail shot or whatever that same evening.
So it increases speed of follow-up, really, like you were talking about.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. Carol has submitted a question. How many people does she need or should she have on the stand at all times?
Okay, this is a good question. It's a little bit like how long is a piece of string. I guess it depends upon the size of your stand. The number of people on your stand, folks, you need to have at least one, even with a small stand, you need to have at least one person on your stand at all times. And ideally, that should be one free person at all times. So let's imagine you've got a 25 square meter stand and you've got 4 or 5 people on there, that's fine. But if there's no visitors on your stand, and I am a visitor, to walk onto your stand when I can see 4 or 5 pairs of eyes looking at me can be quite daunting. So again, my advice would be leave 1 or 2 people on your stand, have the others in the aisle so they can see if it gets busy, they can then join up and meet visitors. But certainly don't have lots and lots of your staff on the stand and no visitors, because that can actually put people off approaching. It's like a retail environment. If you go into a shop and all you can see is row upon row of sales assistant and not a customer in sight, it makes you think twice. So all I would say is try and keep at least one person free at all times as a loose guide.
Okay. And is there, I mean, we've got a 3-day show here. Would you recommend that companies switch their staff during the 3-day cycle? I know you talked about shifts and breaks. Or is it better for people to build up their knowledge over the show and have the same team?
Exhibiting well is actually quite difficult, and it's also quite exhausting. Now again, it comes back to the resourcing issue, but if you've got the manpower, one of the most effective ways of doing it is to have people manning a stand for no more than half a day. So let's imagine, for the sake of argument, they're on for Monday morning, then at lunchtime the second shift turn up and there's a bit of overlap for the hour of lunch, and then the morning shift goes home, the afternoon shift take over, then you can debrief the very next morning, and then you can repeat that. That way, you know, if for example you have to go to dinner with some of your key clients and maybe it gets a bit boozy, you know that you're not manning the stand first thing in the morning because you've got the other team there. The other way of doing it is to have people there for, you know, a period of hours, so that they're 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon. But certainly I wouldn't try and have somebody there all day, every day for the 3 days of the event. That's just exhausting.
Okay, great stuff. You mentioned that right at the end of your presentation, that stat about how many people don't follow up from the AEO. In my first webinar, I quoted a stat about it's really sort of the changing approach visitors are taking to shows. They're arriving much more planned. They're sort of more hungry for information pre-show, hence they approach shows in a much more regimented way than they used to, due to limited time, that kind of thing. Have you found that? And if so, what key tips could you give our exhibitors to respond to this change in their behaviour?
From my experience, I would say that the majority of visitors now are much more time conscious than ever. They used to go to any show mob-handed. Less of them are going to each show, and they don't go for all 3 days. Often they'll go for a particular day or 2 days. And when they do go, they don't just wander around aimlessly. So again, the idea is that they're doing the intelligent thing, which is to look at the floor plan, look at the people that are exhibiting, and then almost plan a journey through those halls. Now, that's not to say that if someone's there on a planned journey, you can't grab them onto your stand, but clearly, because we know that the visitor focus is about being very conscious of time and making sure that that time is used wisely, anything that you can do pre-show to invite them and make sure that you are on their planned list will certainly give you the edge. The days of just being there and hoping somebody's going to fall onto your stand sadly have gone.
Okay, all right, great stuff. And then we've got one final question in from Sam, then we'll wrap up. What are your thoughts about using artists or magicians on the stand?
Yeah, you see them quite often, don't you? The interesting thing about them is, without a doubt, some people love them and some people hate them, and that's just a personal tasting. The reason it works, let's imagine you've got a caricaturist. Most visitors will say, oh, it's going to take 3 minutes, yeah, why not? I'll have a quick caricature done and I can take it home, show the wife and kids or whatever. The interesting thing is when you're there having your face cartooned, you don't just sit there in complete silence. So somebody can approach you and go, so, you know, what brings you to the show and why are you here? And actually it's a really good way of qualifying whether they're a prospect for your products or services or not. So I would say, yes, it's quite a good way of doing it, especially if you are selling a service rather than a product. You know, if you've got a product, people can see and touch and play with your product, and that's great. But when you're a service provider, it becomes much harder to give them something to look at, and therefore something like that can also be quite buzzy on your stand.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that's the last question. So thanks very much indeed, Simon, today. Just to mention, everybody, Simon's telephone number and email address are on the screen there. So if you think of a question after this webinar, or you are a bit shy to come forward today, then do just drop him a line directly, or by all means, drop any member of the Sustainability Live marketing team a line, and we'll try and answer it ourselves. So thanks very much, Simon. It really just leaves me now to kind of wrap up and remind you of a future webinar, which sort of ties on to the point that Simon was making about how important follow-up is. In April, right after the show during April, we're going to be running a third webinar in this series called Following Up the Crowd. So you can see there's a theme there, where I'm going to be talking about that all-important follow-up activity that you can undertake right after the show. So we don't clash with the school Easter holidays, I'm aiming to do this sort of around about the 23rd of April, but we'll notify you via email about that. So at least you have a week or so to catch your breath, and then we'll be straight back into advising you how to best follow up. So thanks very much, everyone, today. I hope the webinar today and the previous one have been useful and assist you in making the most of the event. As I say, if you have any questions in the meantime, don't hesitate to call anyone here on the team. I look forward to seeing you at Sustainability Live, which is now just less than a month away. So goodbye. Thank you.